Written and directed by Paul Evan Thomas. We are talking Within the Pines. This is a 2024 Australian movie. Now, I find this film particularly curious. Why do I say that? Well, before I answer it, let me tell you a little bit about the plot. It focuses on a character called Sam, who is a guy who is in the forests of Australia recording kind of ambient forest sounds. We presume to kind of like make some type of sound effects or some type of ASMR videos or something like that. And you know, he's a solitary type of fellow, and he's in the kind of deep in the forests, and across the distance he hears a woman scream, and inevitably kind of goes to investigate and finds that there is in fact a woman being held captive in a trailer by this guy, and obviously being somewhat concerned by this, he plans to help her. But there is what appears to be a serial killer between him and this woman. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So, why is this movie curious to me? Because this film has almost no dialogue, almost no plot, if I'm being completely honest with you. Almost nothing happens in this film. But what it does present, I think, is done relatively well. So, is it a good movie or is it not? So let's discuss it in a bit more detail, and we'll try and break it down and decide. So what does work? Now, let's start with the acting. As I've said, not a lot of dialogue in this movie, so it's hard to really judge, but we can only judge on what we see in front of us. And I will say, I think what we do see is solid. You know, I think everyone here, the few cast members that we do see, good job. I have no problems with the acting, so therefore we have to say the acting is good, because, you know, even though there's not a lot of dialogue and a lot of it is physical acting, it's all fine. So the acting is good. A movie which is about a guy recording sounds relies as a concept, as a movie that kind of uses sounds as a storytelling device. And because this movie is so quiet, you know, there's no real reason for our character of Sam to be like talking to himself necessarily. You know, it's a quiet film, and therefore these small kind of like little sound effects, sounds of the forest, and obviously the sound of one's footprint and this, you know, this killer's potential footprints becomes a storytelling device. And I do think the movie uses the sound, or sometimes the lack thereof, as a way of demonstrating the kind of the quietness of this kind of isolated area, and the fact that it, you know, obviously this guy has like sound boosting equipment. He is able to kind of somewhat use this to, you know, pinpoint where things are. For example, where this guy might be walking and stuff. So because of it is such a quiet film, it's subtle kind of soundtrack, and, you know, just these kind of sound effects, you find yourself very much kind of listening to the barest of kind of little effects here and there. So I do think it's somewhat effective in using sounds as a kind of crux to tell the kind of the story. So I actually thought this was quite good, and almost it demonstrates, without overtly telling you, the importance of sound and listening and sort of using this as a sense. I almost wish they had gone a little further with it to kind of really demonstrate this, and I'll give an example why I say that in a minute. Outside of that, I will say I think the way this movie is shot, in this kind of forestry area, this kind of natural light, it feels kind of very like holistic and sort of warm, because it's, you know, it's very much about the kind of this natural environment, and when you see this, you just think it feels like quite well shot. The slow, deliberate pace of the movie, you know, I think really amplifies this kind of the quietness of this movie, and the pace is very deliberate. The technical elements are very strong. It's kind of like, you know, the framing and everything like that. You know, I'm going to say on a technical level, I think this movie is strong. There is kind of a moment or so of punctuated violence, which I think kind of works pretty well within the film, because it is such a sort of rarity in the film. We also have a few sort of scenes which are sort of told in a non-linear fashion that will kind of give a little bit of context as to what has happened. And is this such, you know, for such a simple story, you know, it gives us a way to see other points of view, or sort of a little bit of context as to the circumstances of what we find ourselves, which I think was interesting. Okay, let's now look at what doesn't work in this film. This film is extraordinarily simple. When I'm telling you the plot of this movie, I'm pretty much telling you everything about this film. It is such a bare bones plot. In a way, it's designed to be this, because obviously it's trying to have this very simplistic story and have this kind of quieter film, which we're meant to take in the kind of the silence of the forest and everything. But I do think there is some negatives. And so I think the movie really suffers from a lack of characterization. This is the biggest problem I have with this film. Is that for a film which really there's not a lot of happening once we, you know, it's a guy walking in the forest who finds a kidnapped girl and a guy holding her, and that's it. That is it. We know really next to nothing about our character of Sam. We know very little about our antagonist. It appears to be, he could be a policeman, or he could, or he's posing as a policeman, but again, it's very little context as to, is that one or the other? It's so, there's so the bare minimum of character development here. I do think it's to the movie's detriment. I get that it was to be this quiet film, right? I understand that, and it definitely succeeds in that. But it is to the film's detriment, where I feel you simply know nothing, and this is the other problem with this movie, because you don't really know this character. You therefore find it hard to really get that invested. And when you have a movie which is such a slow, quiet film, you can't help but like look at your phone, because realistically, there's really very little happening. So it's a film which I think really struggles to hold one's interest. This is definitely not a movie for the TikTok generation. Let me just kind of say that. And although I appreciate the quiet, deliberate pace of this film, I think it needed to have a little bit more going on involved in it. You know, at least have some more setup to get to know the character of Sam, to know a little bit more about this kidnapper, to know anything about this victim. We know nothing. And it was obviously a choice. I presume. I mean, I presume this isn't an oversight, but a choice. But I think it is, as I say, it hurts the film. And then when we have our film, because it's such a simple story where the barest minimum actually happens on camera, I think we have to be hypercritical to what does happen. And there are scenes here where the character of Sam makes some choices that seem unwise, shall we say. Let's just say, because the movie is so focused on sound, he sort of gives away his position a couple of times, and you would think, why would you do that? Why would you do that? Again, when sound is so important, you know. So there's that. Now, does this make it for a good film? I think technically speaking, this probably is a proficiently made film, but as a storytelling device, it really, I think, fails to tell much of a story. This is almost like part of a story. It's like the kind of like the second half of a movie where, you know, it's assuming we have like an established character and everything like that, that's been kind of stretched out. It's not a particularly long film, but because the barest minimum happens, even though I think what we do see is probably, you know, filmed and stuff and acted in a good standard, I just don't think there's enough there. I also think it would have been a missed opportunity to have a kind of sound versus sight type situation. So, for example, we have our protagonist Sam using this kind of equipment to listen, and he shuts his eyes and he's like listening to this kind of like this ground to see if he can see where, you know, our antagonist is. But wouldn't it have been interesting to maybe if the antagonist, this killer, this kidnapper, maybe he had night vision goggles, so he has, in the dark for example, can see better than Sam, but maybe can't hear, and then vice versa, where we have a character who's using equipment to enhance his hearing, but is, you know, because it's dark in the night, obviously he can't really see, and this other guy, maybe he can see better but can't hear. And I think that would have been a really interesting kind of dichotomy about the kind of the senses and how, you know, we use them in different ways, and which one might actually be kind of more beneficial within certain circumstances and things like that. Again, I don't really like to rewrite movies in reviews, but it seemed like to me an obvious way where you could have this real sort of you know, two distinct advantages, and you know, but it never does that. So that was a missed opportunity for me. So I have to say, I think on a technical level this movie is good, but I do think on a storytelling level it sort of is lacking. I wouldn't say it fails, but it's lacking. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10 because I just simply don't think it's interesting enough, and not enough happens for it to be considered a truly good movie. But it's certainly not a bad movie, and I think, like I say, on the filmmaking side of stuff, I think there is some skill behind it. Maybe they did a better writer and a producer, perhaps. So 5 out of 10. What were your thoughts? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.